Hey there, this is Chris Buckholz, and in this video we're going to talk about developing the upper register. Whether your bass trombonist is working on the Franck Symphony in D or the Hariano Suite, or you are a tenor player who has to work on the Rennes Symphony or Bolero, or you're playing lead in a big band, you need a great, reliable, and awesome sounding upper register, and these are my tips for doing so. Number one is to learn wedge breathing, and we're going to talk about what wedge breathing is in a minute. Number two is going to be equipment choices and consistency of mouthpiece rim, and number three will be hard day, easy day practice. So the concept of wedge breathing was developed by one of the greatest jazz and lead trumpet players of all time, and that's Bobby Shew. And also he's a great lead trumpet teacher, so he's taught these concepts to lots of other fine players. And it came from a very old book from the early 1900s called The Science of Breath by Yogi Ramacharaka. It's a public domain book. You can get it in PDF format and get it for free off the internet. Maynard Ferguson studied this book, and that's where Bobby learned about it. And Bobby had it in his trumpet case on a recording session with the great Bud Brisbois, who was another phenomenal lead trumpet player, extreme register player. And Bud said, "Oh yeah, I see you have The Science of Breath in your case." And Bobby said, "Oh yeah, Maynard turned me onto this book." And he said, "Oh, that's exactly how I breathe." So Bud Brisbois was also breathing like this, and I suspect that most great lead trumpet players do some form of what I'm going to teach you now. So we are going to take in a comfortably large breath, large enough that our rib cage is expanding, not just our abdomen. And so that breath looks like this. This is just kind of how I normally breathe on the trombone. Again, it looks like your shoulders are raising, but I'm not squeezing my trapezius muscles. That's really just a byproduct of my ribs separating and rotating out to accommodate my expanded lungs. So that's step one. Step two is you're going to move in your abdomen enough that you're kind of squeezing all this stuff down here against your diaphragm that sits cross like this, the bottom of your lungs. And so that's going to push on the bottom of your lungs and kind of be like squeezing a full toothpaste tube. I like that analogy a lot if you want to relate to that. So that we get pressurized air up to our embouchure and through it. The air still has to move even though it's highly pressurized. You can get air that's so pressurized that there's barely any air moving and you have a very weak upper register. So we want the air to move under this set of conditions. So we want to fill up again, let our ribcage expand, and then as soon as we start breathing out, we want to feel our abdomen move in a lot, and particularly think about the top part of your abdominal muscles rolling under your ribcage somewhat. And if I do that, then generally I can get out some pretty high notes that sound good. Now, years ago, I didn't have that double high B flat. It just wasn't there for me. And I always had a good high F, but I never had the double high B flat above that. And that has been developed over time through this wedge breathing. I would not have that double high B flat sound as good if I am not wedge breathing. So it definitely makes the note more powerful and resonant if I do this. But wedge breathing isn't just good for the extreme upper register. It'll also help you if you're a bass trombonist trying to play, the high B in Harianos. So this is applicable to a lot of different situations, and it really doesn't matter what your range is. If you take a breath like this before you start doing your upper register playing, it will assist you in playing those notes. So that's number one. Again, comfortably large breath, fill up the rib cage, allow that to expand, move in the abdomen a lot, particularly think of rolling in the top part of your abdomen underneath your rib cage. Okay, so breathing is very important. Number two, equipment choices. I can think of many players who have great upper registers that have not changed their mouthpiece rim in ages, decades. And I think there's something to this. I think that playing on the same mouthpiece rim, regardless of the size of cup that you have, over a long period of time and not changing that, keeping that stable for the embouchure muscles to develop, is key for developing the extreme upper range. So I'm talking about Maynard Ferguson, on the trombone, Bill Watrous, Carl Fontana, Marshall Jilks. These are all guys who have played on the same mouthpiece rim for a really long time. And while that's not a guarantee that you're going to have an amazing high register, I do find that it's a common facet. Dave Steinmeier's another one, who's been playing on the same mouthpiece rim for, God, I don't know, 50 years, 40 years. There is something to this, and something to think about when you're choosing equipment. Second of all, not all equipment is the same when we play in the upper register. Now, I'm playing on here a Bach 42 bell with a Bach 50 bass trombone slide. So I'm playing on pretty big equipment, and I find that the upper register works great on this combination. You would think that it would be a struggle, but it actually works better than my 547 bore slides do for playing this in extreme register. And so I'm going to kind of do the same thing, try to get up to that double high B flat on some smaller equipment and show you what that's like. Okay, so here I am with my Bach 12 trombone, and I'm going to do the same thing I did, basically just play a B flat arpeggio from low B flat up to the double high B flat. So it's a little squirrely up there. It's not quite as locked in as the 50 slide is with the 42 bell. I mean, it's tighter, and I can get the notes out, but it's not quite as easy as playing on the 50 slide, believe it or not. Now let's try alto next. Here I am with the alto trombone. We're going to try the same thing again. It's definitely more work for me to get that double high B flat on the alto than it is on the large four tenor with a big old, basically like a 5G mouthpiece on it. Why is that? I don't have a really good explanation. What I can say is that there are equipment choices that I can make, and generally the shallower mouthpieces and smaller horns don't necessarily facilitate the upper range. And so I encourage you to, within the sizes of mouthpieces that you have to have, depending on how you're doubling, that you look for equipment that makes the upper register easier. And don't necessarily assume that because you're playing on the alto trombone that your upper range is going to be a lot better. It's generally going to be about the same as what you're getting on the tenor. It just slots differently, it tunes differently, and it definitely has a different sound, which in certain situations, certainly the Rhenish Symphony is a prime example where you're playing with the French horns, it blends a lot better. So that's the reason why I would choose smaller equipment, not necessarily because it guarantees that the upper register is going to be a whole bunch easier. So the last thing we need to talk about is how to practice for the upper register and the concepts we need to hold in our mind, and things like playing octaves and hard day, easy day practice. So one of the things that Arnold Jacobs taught me that was very helpful to think about the upper register was to transfer your middle register sound up, rather than thinking of the upper register as a separate entity. And one of the ways he did this is by having me play octaves, like the Arbenz octave study. and playing super slow, obviously, and resting where you need to. It doesn't go super high, but it does get you in the habit of establishing a really great lower note and then playing the upper note after it. One of the other things he would do is have us play octaves like this. So establish a really good lower note and then try to get the same kind of sound quality on the upper note, and you can do the same with the low range, where you're starting on a middle register note and going down to a lower register note and trying to keep the sound as open and resonant in the low range as you get in the middle range. Another concept that I think Joe Alessi uses, and certainly came from the great lead trumpet player Maynard Ferguson, was the concept of reaching down for high notes rather than reaching up to them. So Maynard liked to think that he was up on a cloud and he was reaching down for those high notes rather than, being at the bottom of a huge skyscraper and looking up at it. It was a little less intimidating. It was a better mental consumption for him. That's something that you might want to try in your practice sessions. And then finally, if you're really hitting the upper register hard, you probably don't want to do that every single day in your practice sessions. And that's because it takes time for your embouchure to recuperate. Now, the embouchure, as a set of muscles, has an excellent blood supply. That's why it's red. And your eyes heal the fastest in your body, followed by the tissues of your mouth. So there's great recuperative potential in the embouchure, but we have to be careful not to push it so hard that it doesn't have time to recuperate. If we don't give it enough time to recuperate, then basically the muscles start breaking down and they never ever get better, and then you can develop tears. So it's not a bad idea to alternate your high register practice days with days where you do not do that kind of high register playing and you don't overstress the chops. It's an easier day all the way around, endurance wise, range wise, whatever. And you may have to have several days off from an upper register practice session, depending on how hard you push yourself. And you just kind of have to experiment around and see what works best for you. I know that if I'm weightlifting, that I can go an entire week without lifting that for that particular muscle group again. I might be using it in other ways and other days of the week, but I can go a whole week, and generally I'm better than if I try to do every muscle group every other day. That does not work for me. And a lot of great power lifters actually only do maximum lifts once a week. So you may need more than one day off from your hard day of practice in order to recuperate enough to do it again and actually have built strength. So be patient. So to recap, wedge breathing, equipment choices, and make good equipment choices that facilitate your upper range and don't change that mouthpiece rim. And then practicing for transferring the middle register up and not overstressing the chops every day so that the muscles can recuperate. These are all my tips for the upper register. If you have any questions, you can always email me at cbuckholz@unm.edu, and I wish you the very best for developing your upper register.